The scent of fresh ink and expensive perfume mingled like a curse in my conference room. My sister delivered her ultimatum to sign over the firm or lose our family. I signed every page without a tear. Yet, by the very next morning, her lawyer called me with a voice cracking like glass. He screamed that I had made a fatal error. But his panic revealed the truth. By surrendering, I had handed my sister the exact weapon that would dismantle her entire life. My name is Camilla Green, and at 36 years old, I stood in the center of the conference room I had designed myself, watching my life get dismantled across a slab of imported mahogany. The air conditioning in the Green Line Atelier offices usually hummed with a quiet, efficient ambition, but today it felt stagnant, choked by the scent of fresh printer toner and my sister's cloying gardenia perfume. Across the table sat Veronica. She looked perfect, of course. Her hair was a golden cascade that cost more than my first car, and her smile was tight, polite, and completely devoid of warmth. Next to her sat Miles Ketter, her lawyer. He was a man who wore suits that were too shiny and carried himself with the weary arrogance of someone who specialized in bullying people who did not have the funds to fight back. Between us lay a stack of documents thick enough to serve as a doorstop. Veronica tapped a manicured fingernail on the cover page. The sound was like a beak hitting glass. "It is standard, Camilla," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We just need your signature, then this whole ugly mess goes away." I looked down at the paperwork. The terms were brutal. They were absolute. The contract demanded the immediate transfer of 51% of the controlling interest in Green Line Atelier to Veronica Green. It required me to sign over my rights to the family estate in Colorado. And perhaps most insultingly, it included a comprehensive waiver of all future claims against the estate or the new majority shareholder. 51%, I said. My voice did not shake. "You want the firm." "I want what is fair," Veronica corrected, though her eyes were hard. "Dad always said we should share. You have been hoarding the success, Camilla. And frankly, with the rumors circulating, I am doing you a favor." That was the leverage. That was the knife at my throat. Miles cleared his throat, opening a leather folder to reveal a separate, thinner stack of papers. These were not contracts. They were affidavits, drafts of press releases. "Ms. Green," Miles said, his tone oily, "if we cannot come to an amicable agreement regarding the transfer of assets today, my client will be forced to file a formal complaint regarding the validity of your late father's will. We have witness testimony suggesting undue influence in his final months. Furthermore," he paused for dramatic effect, "we are prepared to reopen the investigation into the structural failure at the Parker site 3 years ago. We have a new engineer willing to testify that the oversight was yours, not the contractor's." I stared at him. The Parker incident had been a minor scaffolding collapse caused by a storm, and I had been cleared of all liability. But a renewed investigation, combined with accusations of elder abuse regarding my father, would destroy my reputation. In architecture, reputation is the only currency that matters. If they launched this campaign, Green Line Atelier would be radioactive before the week ended. "You would burn the company just to take it," I said to Veronica. "I am saving the family legacy," she snapped. "Sign the papers. Camilla, don't make me ruin you." I looked at the pen lying on the table. It was a heavy black fountain pen that I had bought for myself when I landed my first commercial contract. I picked it up. Miles leaned forward, expecting a fight. He expected me to scream, to throw the water glass, to beg for a compromise. He was ready for a negotiation. I uncapped the pen. The nib scratched against the paper. I signed my name. Then I flipped the page. I signed again. The room went silent. Save for the rhythmic scratching of the nib, I did not read the clauses. I did not ask for a clarification. I moved through the stack with the mechanical efficiency of someone signing for a delivery of office supplies. Veronica blinked, her mouth slightly open. She had rehearsed a dozen arguments, and I had robbed her of every single one of them. She looked almost disappointed that she did not get to twist the knife further. I reached the final page. Camilla Green. I dated it. I capped the pen and set it down gently, perfectly parallel to the edge of the paper. Done, I said. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my office key card and the brass key to the executive suite. I placed them on top of the signed contract. Camila? Veronica asked, her voice faltering for the first time. You aren't going to say anything? You have the 51%, I said. You have the house. You have the waiver. Congratulations. Veronica, you are the boss. I turned on my heel and walked out. I walked past the open plan desks where my 12 employees were working, past the scale models of the library we were designing, and out the glass double doors. I did not look back. I did not slam the door. I went home, poured a glass of water, and went to sleep at 9 o'clock. The next morning, the sun hit my apartment window at 7. I was already awake, sitting at my kitchen island, watching my phone. It rang at 8:15. Camila! Veronica's voice came through the speaker, breathless and triumphant. I just wanted to say, I am glad you were sensible yesterday. Miles is going through the final filing now, and we are going to make some big changes. I was thinking we should... Shut up. The scream did not come from me. It came from the background on Veronica's end. It was Miles Ketter. He sounded like a man who had just watched a car crash in slow motion. Miles? Veronica sounded confused. I am on the phone with her. Put her on speaker, Miles roared. The phone rustled, and then his voice came through, clear and trembling with panic. Ms. Green? Camila? Are you there? I am here. Miles, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. You signed the waiver, Miles said, his voice rising in pitch. You signed the transfer of assets. You transferred the liability. I gave Veronica exactly what she asked for, I replied. You knew, Miles screamed. You knew about the clause in the bylaws. You let her take the majority share without disclosing the liquidity requirement. What is he talking about? Veronica demanded, her voice shrill. You idiot, Miles yelled at her. Do you realize what you have done? By taking 51% of the company and forcing her to resign, you just triggered the immediate repayment clause on the firm's capital loans. The bank just called. They want $2 million by close of business today, or they seize your personal assets. You signed the guarantee. Veronica, you signed it when you took the equity. But the firm has money, Veronica stammered. The firm has cash flow, Miles shouted. It does not have $2 million in liquid capital. And since Camila signed the waiver you forced on her, she is absolved of the debt. It is all on you. Camila? Veronica's voice was small now, terrified. Camila, tell him he is wrong. You have to fix this. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the oven opposite me. My face was calm. I can't help you. Veronica, I said softly. I don't work there anymore, and as per the contract you drafted, I have waived all rights to interfere in company business. You set me up, she shrieked. No, I said. I just let you win. I hung up the phone. The silence in the apartment was beautiful. It was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a demolition charge that had just been armed. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city skyline. Okay, I whispered to myself. Begin. To understand why a veteran lawyer was hyperventilating on the floor of my former office, and to understand how I knew exactly which trap door to leave unlocked. You have to understand that this did not start yesterday. It did not even start with the will. If you want to understand the collapse, you have to go back 6 years. I grew up in Fort Collins, Colorado, a place where the mountains loom large enough to remind you daily of your own insignificance. I was not born into an architectural dynasty. I did not inherit a Rolodex of wealthy clients or a trust fund to cushion my failures. I am 36 years old, unmarried, childless, and I live my life with the same structural discipline I apply to my blueprints, everything I have. I built from the ground up. starting with a savings account that held exactly $5,000 and a laptop that overheated every time I tried to render a 3D model. Greenline Atelier did not begin in a glass-walled office downtown. It began at my kitchen table, fueled by lukewarm coffee and the desperate need to prove that I could survive on my own terms. For the first 2 years, I took every job that came my way. I renovated strip mall bathrooms. I redesigned the break room for a local dental practice. I drafted permit sets for garage conversions that paid barely enough to cover my rent. But I was meticulous. I developed a reputation in the local industry as someone who was difficult but precise. Contractors knew that if Camilla Green stamped a drawing, the measurements were correct down to the millimeter. They called me rigid. They called me cold. But they hired me because I saved them money on rework by the time I faced my sister across that conference table. Greenline had grown to 12 full-time employees. We were being featured in regional design magazines. We had just secured a contract for a boutique hotel in Denver. I had built a life that was quiet, orderly, and entirely mine. Then there was Veronica. My sister is 3 years older than me, but she has always possessed a kind of frantic, youthful energy that I lacked. If I was the load-bearing wall, Veronica was the chandelier, flashy, fragile, and hanging precariously overhead. She worked in public relations, or perhaps it was brand consulting. The title changed every 6 months depending on who she was dating or what city she was trying to conquer. She was beautiful in a way that required constant maintenance, and she had a talent for knowing people who seemed powerful, but usually turned out to be as hollow as she was. We were never close. Our mother died when I was 12, leaving us with our father, Graham Green. Dad was a construction site manager, a man of few words who smelled perpetually of sawdust and diesel. He understood concrete and steel better than he understood the emotional needs of 2 teenage girls. He loved us, but he loved us from a distance, expressing his affection through practical checks on our tire pressure and lectures on the importance of a good credit score. When Dad got sick, the dynamic shifted with terrifying speed. He had been complaining of back pain for months, dismissing it as the price of 40 years in construction. By the time he collapsed in his kitchen, the cancer had metastasized to his spine. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lasted 4. For the first 3 decades of my life. Veronica visited Dad perhaps twice a year. She would sweep in for Christmas, complain about the dry Colorado air, borrow money for a car repair or a credit card bill she had forgotten, and then vanish back to whatever coastal city she was currently inhabiting. But the moment the diagnosis became terminal, Veronica returned home. She did not come to change his sheets or manage his pain medication. I did that. I moved my office into the guest room of Dad's house. I coordinated with the hospice nurses. I argued with insurance adjusters on the phone for hours while pacing the hallway. I was the one who held the basin when the chemotherapy made him sick. Veronica, however, suddenly developed a deep interest in paperwork. She would arrive at the house in the mid-afternoon, smelling of wine from a lunch meeting, and sit by Dad's bedside, but she did not ask him about his memories or his pain. She asked about the deed to the house. She asked about his small investment portfolio. She asked where he kept the physical certificates for the municipal bonds he had bought in the 90s. I remember walking into the living room one evening to find her rummaging through his desk drawers. "I am just organizing," she had said, not even looking guilty. "Dad is so messy. Camila, we need to know what we are dealing with. For the estate." "He is not dead yet, Veronica," I had snapped, snatching a file folder from her hand. "Be practical," she had replied, her voice smooth and condescending. "You are good at the nurse stuff. Let me handle the business stuff. That is my strength. Remember? I handle assets." She did not handle assets. She consumed them, but I was too exhausted to fight her. I was sleeping 4 hours a night and trying to run a growing architecture firm from a dying man's bedside. I let her look at the papers because it kept her out of the way. I thought she was just being greedy. I did not realize she was scouting. Dad saw it. The morphine dulled his pain, but it did not dull his instincts. He had spent his life watching people try to cut corners on construction sites. He knew a hustle when he saw one. 2 days before he slipped into a coma. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak, his skin like parchment paper over bone. But his eyes were lucid. "Camila," he whispered. The effort of speaking rattled in his chest. "I am here, Dad," I said, leaning close. "Your sister," he wheezed. "She is hungry." "I know," I said. "Don't worry about it. I will handle her." He shook his head. A tiny, frustrated movement. "No, you fix things. You always fix things. But you cannot fix her. If you have to choose—" He paused to breathe, the sound harsh in the quiet room. "If you have to choose, Camila, choose the truth. Do not choose a fake peace. Peace is expensive. The truth is free." I did not fully understand him then. I thought he was talking about the funeral arrangements, or perhaps some old family secret I didn't know about. I squeezed his hand and told him to rest. He died on a Tuesday morning. The funeral was small. Veronica wore a black dress that was slightly too short and cried loudly when the neighbors were looking. I did not cry until I was alone in my car. 3 days later, after the funeral, the house felt heavy. I assumed we would sell it, split the proceeds, and go our separate ways. Dad had left a will, dividing everything 50-50, but he had placed Veronica's share of the liquid cash into a managed trust that paid out over 10 years. He knew she would blow it all in a month if she had access. Veronica was furious when the lawyer read that clause. She stormed out of the office, accusing me of poisoning Dad against her. I thought that was the end of it. I thought she would take her allowance and leave. Then, a week later, she called me. Her voice was different. It was calm, sweet, even. "Camila," she said, "I am sorry about the scene at the lawyer's office. I was just grieving. Can we talk? I want you to meet someone. He has been helping me sort through my feelings. He wants to help us settle everything fairly." I should have said no. I should have listened to Dad's voice in my head, warning me about fake peace. But I was tired, and she was my only living relative. "Okay," I said. "Bring him over." When the doorbell rang the next evening, I expected a therapist, or perhaps a new boyfriend she had picked up at a bar. I opened the door. Veronica stood there, beaming. Next to her stood a man who looked like he had been manufactured in a boardroom. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a suit that cost more than my first renovation budget. He had a smile that didn't reach his eyes and a watch that ticked too loudly. "Camila," Veronica said, gesturing to him like she was unveiling a statue. "This is Gavin Locke. He is going to help us fix everything." Gavin stepped forward and extended a hand. His palm was dry, his grip firm but impersonal. "A pleasure, Camila," he said. "Your sister has told me so much about your little company." He didn't look at Veronica. He looked past me, into the hallway of my father's house, his eyes scanning the walls, the furniture, and the potential equity like a predator scanning the herd. That was the moment the clock started ticking. I just didn't hear it yet. Gavin Locke did not walk into a room. He curated it. He moved with a practiced ease, the kind that suggested he had spent his entire adult life navigating country clubs and boardrooms where the carpet was thick enough to silence footsteps. He wore a navy suit that fit him a little too perfectly, and as he sat down on my father's worn leather recliner, he made the furniture look cheap. "Scotch?" he offered, pulling a silver flask from his jacket pocket. "It is a 20-year single malt. I find it helps with the gravity of these situations." "No, thank you," I said, sitting opposite him on the sofa. Veronica sat on the armrest of his chair, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. She looked like a cat that had finally caught the canary, or perhaps she was the one who had been caught. I could not tell yet. "Veronica tells me you are quite the builder," Gavin said, pouring a measure into the cap for himself. "Green Line Atelier, boutique commercial renovations, high margins, low overhead, smart model." "It pays the bills," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Come now, don't be modest," he smiled, revealing teeth that were aggressively white. "I looked up your filings. You secured the Henderson contract last month. That is a significant step up in liability exposure. I assume you have restructured your indemnity clauses to protect the personal assets? You are operating as an S-corp, correct? Or did you stick with the LLC for the pass-through taxation? The air in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. These were not the questions of a supportive boyfriend making small talk. These were the questions of an auditor. That is private business information, I said. Oh, I am just an enthusiast. Gavin waved a hand dismissively. I do some consulting and asset management. I hate seeing successful women get eaten alive by capital gains tax or frivolous lawsuits. You have professional liability insurance, obviously. Is it capped at $2 million or $5 million? I looked at Veronica. She was beaming, nodding along as if he were reciting poetry. She did not hear the interrogation. She only heard a man taking an interest in her family. 5, I lied. It was actually 3. And my lawyer handles the structure. Thank you. Lawyers, Gavin scoffed gently. They are good at the law, bad at business. You need to be careful. Camila, with your father passing, the estate becomes a target. If someone sues Greenline and pierces the corporate veil because of a filing error, they could come after this house. They could come after Veronica's inheritance. That is not how it works, I said, standing up. My company is completely ring-fenced from personal assets. Is it? Gavin locked eyes with me. His gaze was flat, analytical, and completely devoid of warmth. I would love to take a look at the operating agreement. Just a second set of eyes. Pro bono. For the family. No. Veronica stood up, her face flushing pink. Camila, stop being so paranoid. Gavin is trying to help. He is a genius with this stuff. He managed funds in New York. Then why is he here in Fort Collins asking about my insurance policy? I asked. Because we are family now, Veronica shouted. And frankly, we need to talk about that. Greenline. It is the only thing in this family that is actually generating real wealth. Dad helped you start it. Dad gave me a loan of $5,000, which I paid back with interest 6 months later. I corrected her. I have the canceled check. But it is the family name, Veronica argued, stepping closer. I want a role. Camila, I am tired of bouncing around. I want to come on board, director of marketing, or brand strategy. I can help you expand. We can make Greenline a family empire. I almost laughed. The idea of Veronica, who had never finished a project in her life. Managing the brand of a firm built on precision and discipline was ludicrous. No, I said firmly. Greenline is mine. I built it. I run it. You have zero experience in architecture or construction management. I have people skills, she yelled. Something you obviously lack. I don't need people skills, I said. I need structural integrity. The answer is no. Veronica. Veronica looked ready to scream, but Gavin reached out and gently touched her arm. It was a subtle gesture, like a trainer calming a horse, and she instantly deflated. Camila is right, Gavin said, his voice smooth as silk. She built the firm. We cannot just expect her to hand over equity or a C-suite position. That would be unfair. He looked at me with a look of practiced humility. I apologize. Camila, I did not mean to overstep. I just see a lot of potential here. My concern is strictly protection. If you don't want me involved in the business, I respect that entirely, but at least let me help you with the estate transition. The tax implications of your father's portfolio are messy. I can set up a trust structure that shields both you and Veronica. No fees. Just let's call it a peace offering. He was pivoting. He realized he could not kick down the front door, so he was trying to unlatch the window. I will think about it, I said, lying again. From that day on, I started keeping a log. Every time Gavin came to the house, every time he emailed me, every time Veronica mentioned a great idea Gavin had for my investments. I wrote it down. I saved the dates. I saved the text messages. I had a folder on my encrypted drive named Pest Control, but knowing a predator is in the grass does not mean you can easily set the field on fire, especially when your sister is standing in the middle of it. 3 weeks later, the trap snapped shut. It was a Tuesday night. My phone rang at 11 o'clock. It was Veronica. She was sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. "Camila, please," she choked out. "You have to come. I am at the apartment. Please." I drove over in my pajamas, a coat thrown over the top. When I arrived at Veronica's apartment, a place she could barely afford in a trendy district, she was sitting on the floor surrounded by unopened mail. Gavin was there, too. He was sitting at the kitchen table, looking grave, holding a stack of letters. "What happened?" I asked, rushing to her side. "They are going to garnish her wages," Gavin said softly. "It is an old credit card debt, and a car loan she co-signed for an ex-boyfriend 3 years ago. It defaulted. With penalties and interest, it is $42,000. $42,000? I stared at Veronica. "How did you let it get this bad?" "I was scared," she wailed. "I threw the letters away. Gavin found them tonight. He says they are going to freeze my bank accounts tomorrow. Camila, I have rent due. I can't live like this. Please." She grabbed my hand, her fingernails digging into my skin. "I will pay you back. I swear, once the trust fund starts paying out next year, I will pay you every cent. Just make it stop." I looked at Gavin. He looked sympathetic, but his eyes were dry. He was watching me. He was measuring me. "I can try to negotiate a payment plan with the creditors," Gavin offered, "but they usually demand a lump sum to stop the legal process." I knew, logically, that this was a mess of her own making. I knew I should let her hit the wall, but she was my big sister. I remembered us playing in the snow in the backyard. I remembered her braiding my hair before my prom. The bond of blood is a terrible, heavy chain. "I will pay it," I said, my voice cold. "Oh, thank God," Veronica sobbed, collapsing against my chest. "But," I said, looking up at Gavin, "I am writing the check directly to the collection agency, not to you, Veronica, and you are signing a promissory note to me. It will be deducted from your share of the house sale later." "Anything," Veronica promised. "Anything you want?" I pulled out my checkbook. My hands were shaking slightly, not from fear, but from anger. I wrote the check for $42,000. As I handed it to Gavin, because he insisted he would handle the logistics to ensure the freeze was lifted, I saw a flicker in his eyes. It was not gratitude. It was satisfaction. He had just learned the most important piece of data in his investigation. He had learned that no matter how tough I pretended to be, no matter how many contracts I audited or how many walls I built, I would still bleed for my family. He knew now that I had a breaking point, and he knew exactly how much pressure it took to find it. "You are a good sister, Camila," Gavin said, tucking the check into his breast pocket. "Truly, family is everything, isn't it?" "Just fix it," I said, and walked out. I did not know it then, but I had just financed the down payment on my own destruction. The reading of the will took place at Wexler & Dunn, a law firm that smelled of old leather and older money. It was located in a brick building downtown, the kind with thick carpets that swallowed the sound of your footsteps and mahogany paneling that seemed to absorb the light. I sat on one side of the long conference table. Veronica sat on the other. Between us sat Arthur Wexler, my father's attorney for 30 years. He was a kind man with trembling hands and a bow tie that looked perpetually crooked. But today, the atmosphere was not kind. It was surgical. Veronica was not alone. She had brought Miles Ketter. I had looked up Miles Ketter the night before. He was not a probate lawyer. He was a litigator known for high-conflict divorces and aggressive corporate hostile takeovers. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored within an inch of its life. And he did not look at Mr. Wexler. He looked at me. His eyes were pale gray, devoid of any human warmth, calculating my net worth as if I were a distressed asset waiting to be liquidated. "Mr. Wexler cleared his throat and began to read. The preamble was standard. My father, Graham Greene, being of sound mind and body, revoked all prior wills. Then came the distribution. To my daughter, Camilla Greene, Wexler read, his voice wavering slightly, I leave 50% of my residual estate, including the property at 406 Elm Street, to be distributed immediately upon probate. Veronica leaned forward. I could see the muscles in her jaw tightening. To my daughter, Veronica Greene, Wexler continued, and then he paused. He adjusted his glasses. I leave 50% of my residual estate. However, this share shall be held in a spendthrift trust managed by an independent trustee. Distributions will be made in monthly installments over a period of 10 years, provided the beneficiary can demonstrate proof of gainful employment and a clean financial audit annually. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a lung. Veronica stood up slowly. Her face had gone from pale to a blotchy, furious red. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Then she screamed, "What is this?" "It is your father's wish, Veronica." "Mr." Wexler said softly, "He wanted to ensure you were supported long-term." "Supported?" she shrieked. She slammed her hand on the table. "I am 39 years old. I am not a child. This is an allowance. This is insulting." She spun toward me, her finger pointing like a loaded weapon. "You did this," she hissed. "You were with him every day at the end. You whispered in his ear while he was high on morphine. You told him I was irresponsible. You told him to lock my money away." "I never spoke to him about the will," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the rapid beating of my heart. "Dad knew you, Veronica. He knew about the debts. He knew about the gambling. He wanted to protect you from yourself." "Liar!" Veronica lunged toward the table, grabbing the document from Mr. Wexler's hands. "You stole my inheritance. You manipulated a dying old man to control me." "Veronica," the word was spoken softly, almost a whisper, but it cut through her hysteria like a scalpel. It was Miles Ketter. He had not moved. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded on the table. He did not look at her. He kept his eyes on me. "Sit down," Miles said. Veronica froze. The rage seemed to drain out of her instantly, replaced by a strange, mechanical obedience. It was terrifying to watch. It was as if she had been programmed. She sat down, smoothing her skirt, her breathing still ragged but her mouth shut. Miles smiled at me. It was not a nice smile. "Ms. Greene," Miles said, his voice smooth and deep. "This document is problematic. The restrictions placed on my client are punitive and suggest a lack of testamentary capacity on the part of your father, or, more likely, undue influence from the primary caregiver." "My father was lucid until the end," I said. "Mr. Wexler can attest to that." "Mr. Wexler drafted the will," Miles countered effortlessly. "He is hardly an unbiased witness. We are prepared to contest this. We will file a suit alleging that you used your position of trust to coerce your father into altering his estate plan to your benefit." "That is absurd," I said. "The split is 50-50. I gain nothing extra." "Control is a gain," Miles said. "But let us look at the bigger picture. You run a reputable architecture firm, do you not? Greenline Atelier. You rely on the trust of your clients. You rely on your reputation for ethics." He leaned forward. "Imagine the headlines. Camilla, local architect sued for elder abuse. Daughter accused of manipulating dying father for financial control. We will depose your staff. We will subpoena your emails. We will audit every hour you spent at that house during his final months. We will drag this out for 3 years. By the time we are done, no developer in Colorado will hire you to build a doghouse, let alone a hotel." I felt the blood drain from my face. He knew exactly where to hit. My reputation was my livelihood. A lawsuit like that, even if I won, would leave a stain that no amount of PR could wash away. "What do you want?" I asked. "We want the trust dissolved," Miles said. "We want the assets liquidated and distributed in cash, immediately. I cannot change the will, I said. I am not the executor. The bank is. Then we will see you in court, Miles said. He stood up. Come, Veronica. They walked out. Veronica shot me one last look of pure venom, but she followed him like a trained dog. I left the office 10 minutes later, shaking. I drove straight to my father's house. I needed to feel close to him. I needed to verify that the sanctuary he had built was still standing. When I unlocked the front door, the air inside felt stale. I walked into the living room, intending to sit in his chair and think. Then I stopped. The wall above the fireplace was empty. My father had a collection of antique surveying equipment. There was a brass theodolite from the 1920s that he cherished. It had been on the mantel for as long as I could remember. It was gone. I ran to his study. The drawers of his desk were open. I checked the small safe in the closet where he kept the deeds and the vehicle titles. Empty. I checked the bedroom. His watch box was missing. It had contained a vintage Omega and a gold Patek Philippe that he had bought after his first big project. They were not just watches. They were the milestones of his life. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. This was not just a legal dispute. This was a raid. I pulled out my phone and called a locksmith. Then I called the security company to check the logs. No forced entry, ma'am, the operator told me. The alarm was disarmed with the master code at 10 o'clock this morning, then armed again at 11. 10 o'clock. While I was sitting in the law office waiting for them to arrive. When the locksmith arrived, a burly man named Dave, who had worked on my construction sites before, he took one look at the deadbolt and sighed. I can change these for you, Ms. Green, he said. But you should know, this is a high-security cylinder. You cannot just copy these keys at a hardware store. You need a code card. I have the card, I said, patting my purse. Well, Dave scratched his chin. Someone used it recently. I can see the fresh graphite marks on the tumblers, and the registry shows a duplicate key was cut 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago. That was the week Veronica had brought Gavin to dinner. The week Gavin had asked for a tour of the house to appreciate the architecture. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling the weight of the realization crashing down on me. Veronica and Gavin did not care about the lawsuit. The threat of undue influence was just smoke. Miles Ketter was a distraction to keep me focused on the legal battle while they stripped the carcass clean. They were not waiting for a judge to rule. They were taking everything that wasn't bolted down. They knew that by the time the courts resolved the estate, the jewelry, the cash, and the collectibles would be long gone, sold off to pay Gavin's debts or fund Veronica's delusions. I looked at the empty space on the mantel where the theodolite used to be. My father had used that instrument to measure straight lines, to ensure that foundations were true. Change the locks, Dave, I said, my voice hard. Change them all, and install deadbolts on the interior doors, too. You expecting trouble? Dave asked, pulling out his drill. Trouble is already here, I said. I just didn't realize it was carrying a key. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. A black sedan was parked 3 houses down. It was too far away to see the driver, but I knew they were watching. They were waiting to see if I would break. I touched the cold glass. You want a war? I whispered to the empty street. You can have one, but I knew, deep down, that a war was exactly what they wanted. Chaos favored the ones who had nothing to lose. I had everything to lose. I needed a different strategy. I needed to stop reacting and start hunting. I did not find Vance in the yellow pages or through a Google search. I found him through a contact in construction insurance. A man who specialized in high-rise liability and knew exactly who to call when a claim smelled like fraud. Vance was a forensic accountant who had pivoted to private investigation. A man who understood that the most damning footprints are not left in mud, but in ledgers. We met in a diner 3 towns over, away from the prying eyes of Fort Collins society. It was raining, a cold, miserable drizzle that streaked the windows. Vance was already there, nursing a black coffee. He did not look like a detective from a movie. He looked like a tired math teacher, wearing a beige cardigan and reading glasses on a chain. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He slid a thick manila envelope across the laminate table. "You are paying me by the hour, Ms. Green," Vance said, his voice dry as dust. "So I will be brief. The man sleeping in your sister's bed is named Gavin Locke. That part is true. But 5 years ago, in Phoenix, he was Gavin Lister, and 4 years before that, in Seattle, he was Gavin Larrabee." I felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. I opened the folder. "He likes the initials G.L., Vance continued, tapping a finger on a photocopy of a driver's license. "It makes it easier to keep his monogrammed luggage. He has no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket, but if you look at the civil court records, which I did, he is a frequent flyer." I scanned the documents. There were lawsuits in 3 different states: breach of fiduciary duty, misappropriation of partnership funds, unjust enrichment. "He targets small family businesses in transition," Vance explained. "Usually right after a death or a divorce, he comes in as a consultant, a boyfriend, or a savior. He restructures the assets, sets up shell companies for tax efficiency, and by the time the family realizes the money is gone, he has moved on. He settles out of court for pennies on the dollar because the victims are too embarrassed or too broke to prosecute. It is not theft. Technically, it is bad business advice signed off by the victim. He is a professional parasite," I said. "He is a demolition expert," Vance corrected. "But here is the part that will really upset you." He flipped to the back of the folder and pulled out a series of grainy photographs. They were stills from a security camera. "I pulled these from a parking garage surveillance system across the street from your father's house," Vance said. "Look at the timestamp." I looked. The date was 2 months ago, 3 weeks before my father died, 4 weeks before Veronica supposedly introduced me to her new boyfriend, in the photo. Gavin was sitting in his car, watching my father's house. In another, he was photographing the front porch. "He was casing the asset," Vance said. "He didn't meet Veronica by accident. Ms. Green, he targeted the family. He knew the property value, and he likely knew your father was terminal. He positioned himself to intercept the inheritance." I felt sick. Veronica thought she had found love. She thought she had found a partner. In reality, she was just the entry code he needed to crack the safe. I thanked Vance, paid him in cash, and drove back to my office with the dossier burning a hole in the passenger seat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive straight to Veronica's apartment and shake her until she woke up, but I knew it wouldn't work. She was too deep in his web. If I showed her this, Gavin would spin it. He would say it was a conspiracy. He would say I was jealous. I had to be smarter. When I arrived at Green Line Atelier, the mood was tense. My office manager, a sharp woman named Sarah, looked relieved to see me. "Dylan is looking for you," she said. "He is in the server room. He looks like he saw a ghost." Dylan Shaw was my chief accountant and occasional IT troubleshooter. He was 24. Brilliant, and paranoid about data security. I found him staring at a monitor, typing furiously. "Camila," he said, not turning around. "We have a problem. A big one." "What is it?" I asked, closing the door behind me. "Someone tried to access the vendor payment portal last night," Dylan said. "They had the admin username. They guessed the password 3 times before the firewall locked them out." "Brute force attack?" I asked. "No," Dylan spun his chair around. "That is the scary part. It wasn't a bot from Russia. It was a manual attempt. They knew the username format, and the password guesses? They were variations of your father's name and birth year." I froze. "Track the IP?" I said. "I did," Dylan replied. "It is a residential IP address. Comcast. It geolocates to the Lodo district. Veronica's neighborhood. And there is more," Dylan added. "I checked the email server logs. Someone has been trying to sync your executive inbox to an outside device for the past week. They failed because of the 2-factor authentication, but they are knocking on the door. Camila. Hard." It was Gavin. He wasn't satisfied with the watches and the antique tools. He was coming for the company. He knew that Greenline was the engine that generated the cash, and he wanted the keys. "What do we do?" Dylan asked. "Do we call the police?" "No," I said. "If we call the police, they will ask for proof. An IP address isn't enough to get a warrant, and Gavin will just claim Veronica was trying to help me with work. We need to go dark." I gave the order immediately. We initiated a silent security overhaul. We changed every password in the firm. We migrated our sensitive financial data, the client lists, the bid calculations, the bank access codes, to a secure, air-gapped server that was not connected to the internet, but on the surface. We changed nothing. I told Dylan to leave the old portal active, but disconnected from the real bank accounts, if Gavin managed to break in. I wanted him to see a dummy dashboard. I wanted him to think he was winning. "Make him think we are incompetent," I told Dylan. "Let him think I am too distracted by the lawsuit to notice the cyber rattling." 2 days later, Vance called me again. "I found something else," he said. "Gavin has been making calls to a developer in Chicago, the Sterling Group." My heart stopped. The Sterling Group was the developer behind the Helix project, a massive $50 million mixed-use complex that Greenline was shortlisted for. It was the biggest contract of my career. If we landed it, the firm's valuation would triple overnight. "He isn't trying to sabotage the deal, is he?" I asked. "No," Vance said. "He is trying to ensure you get it. He has been name-dropping you. He wants Greenline to sign that contract." Suddenly, the picture snapped into focus. It was terrifyingly brilliant. Gavin didn't just want to loot the petty cash. He was fattening the pig before the slaughter. He wanted me to sign the Helix contract, locking the firm into a massive revenue stream. Then, once the value was inflated, he would trigger the trap, use the lawsuit, the debts, and Veronica's leverage to force me to sign over control. He would take over a firm that was flush with a $50 million project, kick me out, and drain the advance payments into his offshore accounts before the concrete was even poured. He wasn't just a grifter, he was a corporate raider. I hung up the phone and looked out the window of my office. The city looked different now. It wasn't just concrete and glass. It was a chessboard. Gavin thought I was the prey. He thought I was the grieving daughter, the overwhelmed artist, the weak sister who would crumble under emotional pressure. He thought he was the architect of this scenario. I picked up a red marker and walked to the whiteboard where we mapped out our project timelines. I erased the schedule for the coming week. "Okay," I said to the empty room. "You want the firm? You want the big contract? I will give them to you." I wasn't going to run anymore. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to invite him in. I was going to let him think he had outsmarted me. I would construct a reality so perfect, so tempting, that he wouldn't realize he was walking into a load-bearing trap until the roof came down on his head. It was time to design the renovation of Gavin Locke's life. The art of losing is much harder than the art of winning. To win, you simply have to be better than your opponent. To lose convincingly, you have to dismantle your own ego, piece by piece, and display the wreckage for the world to see. I began to wear my exhaustion like a costume. I stopped using concealer to hide the dark circles under my eyes. I chose clothes that were slightly too large, making me look shrunken and frail. I arrived at meetings 15 minutes late, my hands trembling as I poured water from the pitcher. When I spoke, I let my voice crack. I used phrases like, "I am just so tired," and "I don't know how much more of this I can take." It worked terrifyingly well. Veronica was the first to buy the performance. She had spent her life waiting for me to fail. So when the cracks finally appeared, she did not question them. She reveled in them. Her text messages changed tone. They went from aggressive demands to a sickeningly sweet condescension. "Just checking in on you," she wrote on a Tuesday morning. "Gavin says the legal pressure is a lot for anyone. We just want this to be over so we can be a family again. Don't fight it. Cammy, just let go." She was bragging to our extended cousins. 2. I heard from an aunt in Denver that Veronica was already talking about taking over the family business and modernizing the brand. She was spending the money in her head before the check had even cleared. Gavin, however, was a different animal. He was not interested in my emotional collapse. He was interested in the timeline. He smelled blood. But he also smelled the delay. He knew that the longer this dragged on, the more likely I was to find a loophole. He began pushing Miles Ketter to accelerate the process. My client is concerned about the stability of the asset. Miles told my lawyer. Tessa, during a phone call I listened to on mute. If Ms. Green is emotionally compromised, perhaps an immediate transfer of executive control is necessary to protect the firm's value. She is considering it, Tessa replied, playing her part perfectly. She is looking for an exit strategy. I agreed to meet them, but never at the house and never at their apartment. I insisted on neutral ground, coffee shops in the financial district, hotel lobbies, places where the hum of commerce provided a backdrop. I always chose tables that were directly in the line of sight of security cameras. I needed a record of their coercion, even if it was just silent footage of Gavin leaning across the table, his face twisted in intense pressure, while I sat with my head bowed in submission. While I played the part of the broken woman in public, the real work was happening in the server room of Greenline Atelier. Dylan Shaw was no longer just an accountant. He was the architect of a ghost ship. We worked late into the night, the blinds drawn, turning the company inside out. We created a new legal entity. Let us call it Entity B. It was a boring, generic holding company registered in Delaware, with a name that sounded like a clerical error, legally, slowly, and meticulously. We began to migrate the soul of Greenline into Entity B. The intellectual property rights to our designs were transferred. The employment contracts for my key staff were renegotiated and assigned to the new structure. Effective upon a trigger date, the software licenses, the vendor relationships, the client lists, everything that made the firm actually function, was quietly shifted. What remained in the original Greenline Atelier, LLC, the entity Veronica and Gavin were fighting so hard to steal, was the furniture, the lease on the office space, the liability insurance policy, and the debts. It was a classic corporate shell game. They were fighting for the bottle, thinking it was full of vintage wine. While I was pouring the liquid into a new decanter, "Are you sure this is watertight?" Dylan asked me one night, his eyes red from staring at spreadsheets. "If they audit the books right now, they will see the transfers." "They won't audit?" I said, staring at the screen. "Gavin did his due diligence 3 months ago. He thinks he knows the board. He is arrogant, Dylan. He thinks he has already won. He isn't looking at the foundation anymore. He is measuring the curtains." I also took steps to insulate my personal life. I cannot give you the blueprint, but let us just say that I utilized a series of homestead exemptions and trust instruments to ensure that even if they sued me into oblivion, they could not take my apartment or my car. I built a firewall around my existence. The key was the timing. I needed them to sign the acquisition papers before they realized the company was hollow. I needed them to legally accept responsibility for the shell. Gavin provided the opening. He called me on a Thursday. His voice was tight. "Camilla," he said, "we need to finalize this. The Helix project. I know you are close to signing it. If we transfer control now, I can bring in my own financing to secure the bond. It is the only way to save the deal." He was lying. Of course, he didn't have financing. He wanted to use the Helix advance to pay his own debts. "I can't do this anymore. Gavin," I whispered into the phone, pitching my voice to sound on the verge of tears. "The lawsuit, the accusations about Dad, it is killing me." "I know," he said, his voice dropping to a sympathetic purr. "We can make it all go away. Miles has drafted a comprehensive settlement. You sign over the majority share. We drop the estate lawsuit, and we give you a clean break. You walk away free." "Free?" I repeated. "Completely free," he promised. "We will even sign a waiver releasing you from any future liability for the company's debts. We will take it all on." My heart hammered against my ribs. That was it. That was the sentence I needed. Okay, I said. I will sign. Good, Gavin said. I could hear the relief, the greed, vibrating down the line. Tomorrow morning? No, I said. I need time to say goodbye to the office. Monday morning, 9 o'clock. Come to the conference room. Monday is fine, he said. We will bring the papers. Bring everything, I said. I want it done in one sitting. I hung up the phone. The act dropped instantly. I stood up straight and looked at Dylan. They are coming Monday, I said. Is everything ready? Dylan asked. The new entity is active, I said. The transfer protocols are set to execute the moment I give the signal, the moment they sign that liability waiver. They are buying a burning building. I spent the weekend in a strange state of calm. I went for a run. I bought groceries. I packed a small box of personal items from my desk, the photo of my father, my favorite ruler, a mug he had given me. I wanted the office to look lived in. I wanted them to see the trappings of power and think it was still real. On Monday morning, I arrived at the office at 8. I briefed the staff. I told them to keep their heads down, to work as usual, and that no matter what happened in the conference room, their jobs were safe. They trusted me. They had seen me build this place from nothing. They knew I wouldn't burn them. At 8:55, the elevator chimed. Through the glass doors, I saw them. Veronica was wearing a white suit, looking like a bride coming to claim her dowry. Gavin was in pinstripes, checking his watch. Miles Ketter trailed behind them, clutching his briefcase like a weapon. I stood in the center of the conference room. The smell of fresh ink and expensive perfume drifted in before they even opened the door. Signed, sealed, delivered, I whispered to myself. Then I slumped my shoulders, lowered my head, and prepared to play the final scene of their tragedy. The Friday before the signing ceremony was supposed to be a day of silence, but at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, my phone shattered the peace. It was Marcus Thorne, the senior project lead for the Helix development. We were days away from finalizing the contract that would define the next decade of my firm. And usually, Marcus only called to discuss steel grades or zoning permits. Today, his voice was ice cold. Camilla, he said, I just got off the phone with your vice president of operations. He raised some concerns about your liquidity. Specifically, he mentioned that Greenline might not be able to cover the initial bond requirements without a restructuring of the payment schedule. I froze. I was standing in my kitchen, holding a mug of tea that suddenly felt too heavy to lift. Marcus, I said, keeping my voice level, Greenline does not have a vice president of operations. I run the operations. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The man identified himself as a representative of the ownership trust. Marcus said slowly. He sounded professional. He knew the bond amount. He knew the deadline for the geological surveys. Camilla, if you are having internal partnership disputes, we need to know. The Helix project cannot afford instability. I drove to the developer's office in downtown Denver in 45 minutes, breaking 3 speed limits along the way. I sat in Marcus's glass-walled office and laid out my corporate structure chart on his desk. I showed him that I was the sole signatory. I showed him the bank statements proving our solvency. It was a sabotage attempt. Someone was trying to shake the tree to see if the fruit would fall early. I managed to calm Marcus down. But he was a businessman who survived by being paranoid. He looked at me with narrowing eyes. I believe you. Camilla, he said, but beliefs do not hold up in court. If we are going to sign this contract next week, I need a formal legal attestation of ownership and stability. I need to know exactly who I'm doing business with. I promised him the letter by Monday morning. As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed. It was Gavin. Hey, just checking in, he said. His voice was casual, too casual. Everything okay? I heard there might be a hiccup with the Helix paperwork. I stopped in the middle of the parking garage. The concrete echoed with the sound of distant traffic. How did you hear that? Gavin, I asked. Oh, you know, he chuckled. People talk. It is a small industry. I just want to make sure you are not dropping the ball. Camilla, if you need me to step in and talk to Thorne, I have a way with these guys. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. I never told you his name was Thorne. I said. There was a silence on the line. It lasted only a second, but it was deafening. I had only ever referred to the client as the Sterling Group or the developers. Marcus Thorne was the internal project lead, a name that appeared only on the draft contract sitting on my secure server. I looked it up. Gavin said quickly, recovering his composure. Like I said, I did my due diligence. Don't stress. Camila, just get some sleep. We will fix everything on Monday. He hung up. He had not just looked it up. He had access. I drove straight to the office. It was 6 o'clock in the evening, and the staff had gone home. Only the security lights were humming. I found Dylan Shaw in the server room, his face illuminated by the blue glow of 3 monitors. He looked pale. I am glad you are here, Dylan said, not turning around. Look at this. He pointed to a line of code on the screen. It was a transaction log from the banking portal. I told you they were trying to brute force the password, Dylan said. But I missed something. They did not just want to get in to look around. They injected a command script. It is a ghost draft. What does that mean? I asked. It means they have set up a wire transfer, Dylan explained, his finger trembling as he pointed to the amount. It is sitting in the outbox, hidden behind a system error log so we would not see it. It is for $250,000. The destination is a holding company in the Cayman Islands. He clicked another tab. And here's the kicker, he said. It is scheduled to execute automatically the moment a second authorized user is added to the admin account. I stared at the screen. The number $250,000 was not random. It was exactly the amount of operating cash we kept on hand for payroll and vendor deposits. If I signed the papers on Monday morning, giving Veronica and Gavin 51% control, they would technically become authorized users. The moment their IT guy, whoever was helping Gavin, logged in with the new credentials, the script would trigger. The money would vanish before the ink was dry on the contract. They were not planning to run the company. They were planning to gut it. They would take the cash, let the Helix deal collapse, default on the loans, and walk away leaving me with the wreckage and the lawsuits. I felt a wave of nausea, followed immediately by a cold, hard clarity. Can you stop it? I asked. I can delete the script, Dylan said. No. I said, leave it. Dylan looked at me like I was insane. If you delete it, they will know we found it. I said, they will know I am fighting back. I need them to feel safe. I need them to walk into that room on Monday thinking I am a clueless, broken woman who is handing them the keys to the kingdom. I turned and walked out of the server room. Call Tessa, I said. Tell her I'm coming over. Tessa Rowland was a lawyer who specialized in corporate warfare. Her office was a chaotic mess of case files and coffee cups, but her mind was sharper than a razor. She listened to me explain the situation. The impersonation call, the slip-up with the name, the ghost wire transfer, without blinking. She leaned back in her chair and took off her glasses. Camila, she said, you cannot sign those papers. I have to. I said, this is reckless. Tessa argued, we have evidence of attempted fraud. We have the IP traces. We can file an emergency injunction. We can go to the police. We can drag this out for 2 years in court. But we will win. The quickest way to end this is to show them what we know. Make them afraid. If they know you have caught them, they will run. Scaring them off is not winning. I said. I stood up and paced the small room. If I scare them off now, they will just regroup. Veronica will still have her claim on the estate. Gavin will still be lurking in the background, waiting for another mistake. They will bleed me dry with legal fees and bad press until I really do collapse. I stopped and looked at her. I do not want them to run. Tessa, I want them to stay. You want to trap them, she said. I want them to sign. I corrected her. Tessa shook her head. If they sign, they become majority owners. Even with your shell company strategy, it is a risk. If a judge decides you acted in bad faith to defraud your own partners, you could lose your license. I am not defrauding anyone. I said, I am giving them exactly what they asked for. They asked for the company as it stands on paper. They asked for the liabilities. They asked for the control. I am going to give it to them. I leaned my hands on her desk. Tessa, you said the quickest way is to make them fear the signature. You are wrong. The quickest way is to make them crave it. I want them to sign voluntarily, because voluntariness is the strongest shackle. When they sign that document, they are not just taking the assets. They are certifying that they have done their due diligence. They are certifying that they are of sound mind. They are locking the door from the inside. Tessa looked at me for a long time. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. It was a terrifying smile. You really are your father's daughter, she said. Draft the final agreement. I said, but add the clause we discussed, the one about the personal guarantee for the incoming directors. Make it look standard. Make it look like boilerplate text. They won't read it, Tessa said. Miles is lazy. He thinks he has bullied you into submission. That is exactly what I'm counting on. I said. I left her office and drove home. The city lights blurred past me. I thought about the ghost wire sitting in my server, waiting to steal $250,000. I thought about Gavin casing my father's house. I thought about Veronica crying crocodile tears while she planned to destroy my life. I was done being the victim. Monday morning was coming. The stage was set. The trap was dug. All I had to do was walk into the room and play the part of the lamb, waiting for the wolves to bite down on a piece of meat that was poisoned. I slept soundly that night. It was the deep, dreamless sleep of a soldier the night before the battle. The email from Miles Ketter arrived on Saturday morning with the subject line, Final Execution Copy. The attachment was 40 pages long, and as I read it at my kitchen island, I felt a physical blow to my chest. It was not a settlement. It was an eviction notice from my own life. The terms were draconian. Miles had included a global non-compete clause that banned me from practicing architecture within a 500-mile radius of Colorado for 5 years. There was a demand for a retrospective consulting fee of $150,000 payable to Gavin Locke for his restructuring services. And most terrifyingly, there was a clause granting Veronica full power of attorney over the family estate, removing the independent trustee my father had fought so hard to install. I called Miles immediately. I made sure my voice sounded thin and panicked. I cannot sign this. Miles, I pleaded into the phone. 5 years? I will lose my license. I will lose my livelihood. You are asking me to starve. It is standard for a buyout of this magnitude. Ms. Green, Miles said, his tone bored. We are protecting the company's intellectual property. If you leave, you cannot take the clients with you. Please, I said, letting a sob escape. I will give you the company. I will give you the accounts. Just reduce the non-compete to 1 year. And let me keep my personal car. Please. There was a pause. I could hear him tapping a pen against his desk. He was enjoying this. He was the big-shot lawyer crushing the stubborn business owner. I will speak to my client, Miles said. If we make these concessions, you sign everything else? No more delays? No more looking for lost files? Yes, I said. I just want it to be over. I am done fighting. Monday morning, Miles said. 9 o'clock. Don't be late. I hung up and immediately drove to Tessa's office. She was waiting for me with a red pen and a look of cold determination. They bit, I said. They think I am begging for scraps. Good, Tessa said. Now we swap the poison. We spent the next 12 hours drafting the counter document. To the untrained eye, and even to a lazy lawyer like Miles who was too arrogant to read the fine print of a capitulation, it looked exactly like the document they had sent me, with the minor concessions I had begged for. But the appendices were different. Tessa had drafted a section titled, Schedule of Pre-Distributed Assets. It looked like a standard inventory list. However, listed innocuously among the office furniture and bank accounts were specific items. 1 vintage brass theodolite, 1 Omega Seamaster watch, 1 Patek Philippe gold watch, various bearer bonds dated 1999. If Veronica signs this, Tessa explained, pointing to the clause with her pen. She is legally acknowledging that she has already received these items as part of her inheritance distribution. She is admitting she took them. And since she took them before probate was closed, she is admitting to theft and unauthorized removal of estate assets. And the tax liability? I asked. That is the second trap, Tessa said. We added a clause stating that the acquiring party, Veronica, accepts full responsibility for all tax burdens associated with these received assets. She is signing a confession that she stole them, and she is agreeing to pay the IRS for the privilege. Then we moved to the kill shot for Gavin. Gavin is not a named beneficiary in the will, I said. He is just the boyfriend. How do we hook him? We stroke his ego, Tessa said. She flipped to the signature page. She had added a signature line for Gavin Locke. Underneath his name, the title read, Lead Negotiating Representative and Strategic Advisor. I added a paragraph here, Tessa said, highlighting a block of text. It states that the undersigned advisor attests that he has conducted full due diligence, has advised the beneficiary, Veronica, on the value of the firm, and assumes personal liability for the accuracy of the financial representations made by the acquiring party. He will sign that? I asked. He wants to be the boss, Tessa said. He wants to be the smart guy who orchestrated the takeover. If he signs this, he is not just a witness. He is a party to the fraud. When the bank calls in that loan he is trying to steal, his name is on the hook for negligence and fiduciary breach. And the waiver, I reminded her. Right here, Tessa pointed to the top of the page. The Certificate of Independent Judgment. It states that all parties have read the document, are under no duress, have had access to legal counsel, and are signing of their own free will. Once they sign this, they cannot claim you tricked them. They cannot claim they didn't understand. They are locking the door and swallowing the key. I took the stack of papers home with me. I felt like I was carrying a bomb that was ticking down to zero. Sunday was a blur of nervous energy. I went to the office alone in the afternoon. I told the security guard I was just cleaning out my personal things. I went to the conference room and checked the ceiling, in the corner. There was a small, dome-shaped security camera. It had been installed years ago for insurance purposes, monitoring the main meeting space. It did not record audio. That would be illegal without consent. But it recorded high-definition video. I logged into the security server and adjusted the angle. I zoomed it in until the frame perfectly captured the center of the mahogany table. It would capture the documents. It would capture the faces. It would capture the exact moment the pens hit the paper. I wanted the world to see that I did not force them. I wanted the footage to show me sitting with my hands in my lap, passive and defeated, while they eagerly grabbed the pages and signed away their freedom. Then, I went to my desk. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out the false bottom I had installed when I first bought the desk. Inside lay a single, weathered envelope. My father had given it to me 3 years before he died. He had told me to burn it. He was a soft man, a man who forgave too easily. He had saved Veronica from prison, and he wanted to bury the shame. I opened the envelope and pulled out the document. It was a promissory note from a loan shark in Denver, dated 7 years ago. The amount was $60,000. The signature at the bottom was Graham Greene, but my father hadn't signed it. Veronica had. She had forged his signature to cover a gambling debt. When the sharks came to collect, my father had paid them off to keep them from breaking her legs or going to the police. He had kept the forged note, not to use it, but to remind himself of what she was capable of. I ran my thumb over the jagged signature. It was a felony, forgery, fraud, elder abuse. If I showed this to Miles Ketter right now, the deal would implode. He would drop Veronica as a client to save his own license. Gavin would run for the hills, but I did not want them to run, not yet. I slid the document back into the envelope and placed it in my leather portfolio, right next to the trap contracts. I won't use you to kill the deal, I whispered to the envelope. I will use you to kill their alliance. I knew exactly when to play it. I would wait until the ink was dry. I would wait until they thought they had stripped me of everything. Then, when Miles realized he had just let his client sign a confession, I would put this on the table. I would force Veronica to choose between the money and jail, and I would watch Gavin realize that the woman he was conning was actually a radioactive liability who could drag him down into a criminal investigation. I packed my bag. I checked the camera angle one last time. The sun was setting over Fort Collins, casting long, bloody shadows across the office floor. I was ready. "Come and get it," I said to the empty room. I went home, took a long shower, and laid out my clothes for the morning. I chose a simple gray dress, no jewelry, flat shoes. I wanted to look small. I wanted to look like a woman who had given up. Tomorrow, at 9 o'clock, the curtain would rise, and for the first time in my life, I was going to enjoy watching my sister get exactly what she wanted. Monday morning arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. I walked into the Green Line Atelier conference room at exactly 9 o'clock. The air conditioning was set to 68 degrees, but the room felt stifling. Veronica was already there. She was sitting at the head of the table, a spot I had occupied for 6 years. She wore a white pantsuit that was blindingly bright, and her hair was pulled back in a severe sculptural bun. She looked like a coronation queen waiting for her crown. To her right sat Gavin. He was leaning back in my ergonomic chair, testing the recline mechanism with a smirk. He looked like a man who had just bought a racehorse for the price of a donkey. To her left was Miles Ketter. He did not look up when I entered. He was arranging his fountain pens in a neat row, radiating the bored confidence of a man who charges $600 an hour to ruin people's lives. "You are on time," Gavin said, not standing up. "I like that. Punctuality is a good trait for an employee, or, well, a former employer." "I just want to get this over with," I said. My voice was small. I kept my eyes on the floor, letting my shoulders slump forward. I gripped my leather portfolio with both hands, making sure they saw my knuckles turning white. "Sit," Veronica commanded, pointing to the chair opposite her. "Let us not drag this out. Camilla, I have a lunch reservation at the Capitol Grill to celebrate." I sat down. I did not pour myself water. I acted like I did not deserve it. "We have the final execution copies here," Miles said, sliding a thick stack of documents across the mahogany table. "Standard terms, the transfer of equity, the waiver of claims, the non-compete." I reached out, my hand trembling visibly. I touched the paper, then pulled back. "I brought my own copy," I whispered. The room went silent. Miles looked up, his eyes narrowing. "Excuse me?" he asked. "I spoke to your associate on Saturday," I stammered, looking at Gavin, appealing to his ego. "I begged you about the car and the non-compete radius. You said if I made those changes, we could sign today. So I had my lawyer print the updated version with those specific edits. To save time, I pulled the document prepared by Tessa from my bag. It was identical in weight, font, and binding to the one Miles had. "It is the same agreement," I lied, my voice cracking. "I just changed the radius to 50 miles, so I can maybe find a job in Boulder. And I excluded my personal vehicle from the asset seizure. That is all. Please." Miles sighed, a heavy theatrical sound of annoyance. He snatched the document from my hand. He flipped to page 12. He checked the non-compete clause. 50 miles, he muttered. He flipped to page 30. Vehicle exclusion. Fine. He did not read the appendices. He did not check the definitions section on page 4. He did not look at the schedule of assets on page 42. He assumed that a broken, weeping woman was incapable of sophistication. He assumed that because he was the predator, I must be the prey. "Whatever," Miles said, sliding the papers toward Veronica. "It is immaterial. Just sign it. Veronica, let us get paid." "Wait," Gavin said. He leaned forward, his eyes glittering. "One more thing." I looked up, letting fear wash over my face. "What?" "The transition," Gavin said. "It is going to be messy. I am going to have to spend weeks sorting through your files, fixing your filing system, dealing with your staff. That is my time. My time is expensive." He looked at Veronica, then back at me. "We want a settlement fee," Gavin said, "for the emotional distress you caused the family, and for my consulting hours. $50,000, deducted from your final payout." "50,000?" I gasped. "Gavin, please, that is everything I have left." "Take it or leave it," Gavin said cold. "Or we can go to court, and Miles will sue you for the paper clips." I looked at Veronica. She was smiling. She was enjoying this. She wanted to see me beg. "Okay," I whispered, letting a single tear slide down my cheek. "Okay, just let me sign." Gavin grinned. He looked at Miles. "Add a handwritten rider to the back page. 50,000 deduction." Miles scribbled the note on the final page of my document. He stamped it. "Sign," Miles ordered. Veronica went first. She grabbed the pen like it was a scepter. She signed her name with a flourish. Huge and looping. She did not read a single word. She was signing a confession that she had received stolen property, the watches, the theodolite, and accepting full tax liability for them. She was signing an acknowledgement that the company she was buying was defined in the fine print as the original LLC shell, not the new operating entity. She pushed the papers to Gavin. "Where do I sign?" he asked. "Here," I said, pointing to the line Tessa had added. "Representative and Strategic Advisor." Gavin looked at the title. He puffed out his chest. He liked the sound of that. Strategic Advisor. He signed his name with a heavy, aggressive stroke. He didn't know he had just signed a personal guarantee for the firm's debts and certified that he had conducted a full financial audit, making him liable for the fraud he was about to commit. Then they pushed the stack to me. I picked up the pen. My hand stopped shaking. I looked at the paper. I looked at their signatures. The ink was wet. The trap was sprung. I signed Camilla Green. I dated it. I capped the pen and set it down. "Is it done?" Veronica asked, reaching for the champagne bottle she had hidden in her tote bag. "It is done," I said. I stood up. My posture changed. I straightened my spine. The slump vanished. The fear evaporated from my eyes, replaced by a clarity that was colder than the bottom of a lake. "The keys are on the desk," I said, my voice steady and strong. "The server passwords are in the top drawer. The staff knows you are in charge." "You are leaving?" Gavin asked, frowning at the sudden shift in my demeanor. "I don't work here anymore," I said. "I am just a visitor." I turned and walked to the door. "Hey," Veronica called out, "don't you want to wish us luck?" I paused at the door and looked back. "No, I don't think luck will help you where you're going." I walked out. I walked past Dylan's office. He gave me a tiny, imperceptible nod. He was staying behind to watch the fireworks. I took the elevator down to the lobby, walked out into the sunshine, and got into my car. I did not drive away. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, watching the entrance, inside the conference room. The champagne was likely popping, but the clock was ticking, 30 minutes. That was how long it would take. Up on the 4th floor, the celebration began to sour. I know this because Dylan recounted it to me later. Word for word, after I left, Miles Ketter decided to actually read the document to file it. He was feeling good. He poured himself a glass of the cheap champagne Veronica had brought. He sat down, loosened his tie, and started to scan the pages he had glossed over. He reached page 42, Schedule of Pre-Distributed Assets. His eyes stopped. He read the itemized list. 1 Patek Philippe watch, serial number. He frowned. He looked at the clause above it. Beneficiary acknowledges receipt of these items prior to probate and accepts full liability for any estate taxes or claims of illicit removal. "Veronica," Miles said, his voice dropping. "Did you take your father's watches?" "What?" Veronica laughed, swirling her glass. "Who cares? They are mine now." "You signed a paper saying you took them," Miles said. "You just admitted to looting the estate before the will was executed." "So?" Gavin scoffed. We own the company now. Who is going to sue us? Miles turned the page. He reached the section titled Corporate Structure and Definitions. The term company shall refer exclusively to Greenline Atelier, LLC, Entity A, comprising physical assets and liabilities, all intellectual property, client contracts, and staff employment agreements have been transferred to Greenline Holdings, Entity B, as of... Miles stopped breathing. He read the date. The transfer had happened 3 days ago. Gavin, Miles said, his voice trembling. Did you check the current vendor contracts? Did you check the IP registry this morning? I checked them last week, Gavin said, irritated. Why are you being such a buzzkill? Because, Miles whispered, his face turning the color of ash. She gutted it. We just bought an empty shell. What do you mean? Veronica demanded. She moved the assets, Miles yelled, slamming the table. She moved the contracts. You just bought the lease and the debts, and you signed a waiver saying you understood the structure. That is fraud, Gavin shouted. Standing up, I will sue her. You can't, Miles screamed, pointing at Gavin's signature. You signed as the strategic advisor. You certified that you audited the books. If you sue her for fraud, you are admitting that you are incompetent or complicit. You personally guaranteed the accuracy of the deal. The silence in the room was absolute. Then Miles's phone buzzed. It was an automated alert from the court filing system. The document I had just signed, the one admitting the theft and the transfer, had been electronically filed by Tessa the moment I walked out the door. It was public record now. Miles looked at Veronica. He looked at Gavin. He realized that he was not the shark. He was the bait. You need to call her, Miles whispered, panic rising in his throat like bile. Call her right now, before the bank sees this. My phone rang in the silence of my car. Miles Ketter. Calling. I watched the screen light up. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. I did not answer. I started the engine. The real show was about to begin. The document was the trap, but the leverage, the thing that would bury them, was still sitting in my portfolio. The envelope with my father's forged signature. They thought they had hit rock bottom. They were wrong. They had only just started to fall. An hour after the electronic filing hit the court system, my phone rang. It was not Miles Ketter's secretary. It was Miles himself. His voice, usually a smooth baritone of practiced arrogance, sounded like he had just run a marathon in a suit. Ms. Green, he wheezed. We need to meet. Immediately. I did not go to his office. I told him to come to Tessa's. I wanted him to walk into my territory. When Miles arrived, he was alone. He looked pale, his tie slightly askew. He threw his briefcase onto Tessa's desk and slumped into the chair, looking less like a shark and more like a man who had just realized he was swimming in a tank of electric eels. You cannot do this, Miles said, though the conviction was gone from his voice. You trap them. You let them sign a document that incriminates them in tax fraud and theft. You turned my clients into self-confessors. I did not trap anyone, I said calmly, leaning back in my chair. I provided a contract. They signed it. They had legal counsel. Miles, you were right there. Are you saying you did not advise your clients to read the appendices? Miles flinched. He knew that if he admitted negligence, I could report him to the Bar Association. He was cornered. It is bad faith. Miles argued weakly. We will file an emergency motion to vacate the agreement. We will claim you withheld material information. Tessa laughed. It was a sharp, dry sound. Withheld? We filed a complete asset schedule. Your clients initialed every page. But if you want to talk about withholding information, Miles, let us talk about this. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope, the one my father had hidden in the false bottom of his desk, the one I had almost burned a dozen times. I slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. It was the promissory note from 7 years ago. The loan for $60,000. The signature at the bottom read, Graham Greene. But the handwriting was unmistakably Veronica's Loopy. Chaotic script. Miles picked it up. He adjusted his glasses. He read the date. He read the terms. Then he looked at the second sheet I slid over, a sworn affidavit from my father, notarized 3 years before he died, stating that he had covered the debt to prevent his daughter from facing prosecution for forgery, but that the act remained a felony. Miles went very still. "If you file a motion to vacate," I said, my voice low and steady, "I will file this with the district attorney. This is not a civil dispute. Miles, this is forgery. This is identity theft. And since Veronica just signed a new legal document claiming she has acted in good faith regarding the estate, this becomes evidence of a pattern of criminal behavior." Miles dropped the paper as if it were burning his fingers. He understood the geometry of the situation instantly. If this went to court, Veronica would not just lose the money, she would go to prison. And because Miles had facilitated her hostile takeover while she was technically committing fraud, his firm would be dragged into the investigation. "This destroys her," Miles whispered. "She destroyed herself." I said, "I am just providing the paperwork." The door to the office opened. Veronica and Gavin burst in. They had evidently been waiting in the hallway, unable to contain their panic. "You witch!" Veronica screamed, lunging toward me. "You tricked me! You gave me a shell company! Sit down!" Miles roared. The sheer volume of his voice froze her in place. Veronica looked at her lawyer, shocked. She had never heard him raise his voice. "Shut up and sit down," Miles hissed. "Both of you." Gavin looked at me with pure hatred. "You think you are clever?" he sneered. "I will sue you for breach of contract. I signed as an advisor, not a guarantor. You can't pin the debts on me." Tessa opened a folder on her laptop and turned the screen around. "Actually, Gavin," Tessa said pleasantly, "we are not pinning the debts on you. We are pinning the federal crimes on you." On the screen was a log of IP addresses. "We know you accessed the Greenline server," Tessa explained. "We know you used a brute force script to try and bypass the firewall. We know you impersonated a corporate officer to try and redirect a wire transfer of $250,000 to a Cayman Islands account." Gavin turned white. "That is circumstantial." He stammered, "You can't prove it was me." Tessa clicked a key. An audio file played. It was the recording of the call he had made to Marcus Thorne, the developer. "If you need me to step in and talk to Thorne, I can. You called the client by a name that only existed on our internal server. I said, a server you could only have seen if you hacked it. That is corporate espionage. Gavin, that is wire fraud. And since you just signed a document attesting that you conducted a legal audit of the company, you have now officially tied yourself to the crime scene." Miles stood up. He looked at Gavin. He looked at the hacking logs. He looked at the forgery note. "I am done," Miles said. "What?" Veronica gasped. "I am withdrawing as your counsel," Miles said, shoving his papers into his briefcase. "Effective immediately. I cannot represent clients who are actively engaging in criminal fraud and dragging my firm into a RICO case. You are on your own." "Miles, you can't," Veronica wailed. "I can, and I am," Miles said. He looked at me. "Ms. Green, if you are willing to settle this quietly, I will draft a dissolution of their claims right now. Just keep my name out of the police report." I looked at Veronica. She was trembling. The confidence, the arrogance, the queen-like entitlement, it was all gone. She was just a scared woman who had played a game she didn't understand and lost everything. "Here's the deal," I said. I slid a final document across the table. "You sign this. It is a full surrender. You relinquish all claims to the company, the estate, and the family assets. You agree to a permanent restraining order. You will never contact me, my staff, or my clients again. In exchange, I will not send the forgery evidence to the police, and I will not report Gavin to the FBI for cybercrime." "But the money," Veronica sobbed. "The trust fund." "The trust fund is gone," I said cold. "You spent it on legal fees and Gavin's consulting bills. You leave with nothing. That is the price of the truth." Veronica looked at Gavin. He was staring at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. He was already calculating his exit, realizing she was no longer a cash cow but a liability. Sign it, Gavin hissed at her, before she changes her mind. Veronica picked up the pen. Her hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. She cried as she signed. Ugly. Gasping sobs that echoed in the small office. She signed away her inheritance. She signed away her pride. Gavin signed next. Moving quickly. Desperate to flee. Get out. I said. They left. Miles followed them, pausing only to give me a curt, terrified nod. The room was quiet. Tessa closed her laptop. It is over, she said. I drove back to the office. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot. I walked into the building. The air smelled of cleaning products and coffee. It smelled like work. It smelled like home. I went to my office. The desk was still cluttered with the files I had pretended to pack. I opened the box I had prepared. I took out the framed photograph of my father, the one of him standing on a construction site, wearing a hard hat and a tired smile. I placed it back on the shelf, adjusting it until it was perfectly centered. I sat down in my chair. For the first time in 6 months, my shoulders dropped. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't taste like fear. My phone buzzed. A text message. It was from Veronica. I hope you rot in that office alone. You were always Dad's favorite anyway. I looked at the message. There was no apology, no remorse, just the bitter aftertaste of a poison I had finally spit out. I pressed delete. I opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life. I pulled up the file for the Helix project. The structural diagrams were complex, beautiful, and demanding. They required focus. They required precision. I am not rebuilding from the rubble, I whispered to the empty room. I am building from the bedrock. I picked up my pen and began to work. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on how I handled my sister. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and if you really want to support us, hit that hype button so this story can reach even more people.